Yo, it's Eddie Ortega. I'm back with another Perspective Quest video. This is my little series where we take on the concepts of perspective drawing and we break them down one little bit at a time. In this video, let's talk about mirroring things in perspective. Think about anytime you want to make a door, an arch, a bridge, anything that needs to follow perspective but also has to be perfectly symmetrical. This technique will help you out with that. Now, it might look complex, but the actual concept is very, very simple. So let's get into it. Alright, so before we learn the concept in perspective, let's actually learn it in orthographic view, right? In flat. Let's say I have a scene where I want to draw something like a bridge. I have kind of like two sides of an island here, something like that. And maybe I want to put a nice arc in the middle. Now, it's important to remember that this concept can actually be applied to any shape. It doesn't have to just be arcs, but it's a really good way to actually learn the concept. So, anytime that we want to draw a shape that we want to keep symmetrical, that we want to make sure it's the same on both sides, what we actually need is something called a mirror axis, okay? A line that we're going to use to kind of fold the points over. The easiest way to make a mirror axis is to use a rectangle because rectangles are very easy to subdivide. I cover that in another video, which you can find out on my channel, but let me just show you real quick how that would work. So I'm going to just draw a square right here. Or a rectangle. This doesn't have to be perfect. Now, to find the mirror axis, I have to find a line that would actually divide this square exactly in half. And this is actually really easy to do because if you draw a diagonal line through the opposite corners of a square, you can actually find the exact center of it. Now, that is my mirror axis. And I know that because I know that this line dissects the square basically exactly in equal halves. Now, once you have a mirror axis in place, it's really easy because you could put the shape anywhere on this side or that side of the plane, and then you could project the points over to the other side. So I'm just going to start here on this side. Now, of course, with a view like this, you could say, well, it's pretty easy to just freehand this arc. But if we understand the construction of this, we can actually apply it to far more complicated shapes. So let's actually get into the fun of mirroring this thing. All mirroring techniques basically work the same. We're going to find a point on one side of the mirror axis, and then we're going to find where that point should be on the other side. One of the easiest ways to do that is by using any two lines that we know have a shared angle. So for example, these two diagonals right here have the same exact angle across the mirror line. So having this known diagonal, it's fairly easy to find a point that intersects with my curve. So in this case, we have this point right here. And then all we really need to do is find where that point should land along the other line. In this case, it seems pretty visually obvious. But what we actually need to do is we need to draw a line that projects the point across the mirror line, or you could say perpendicular to the mirror line, okay? To find exactly where that point needs to intersect. And I can find that right there is where that point should land. Now, this process doesn't have to be perfect, but if we actually go through the steps, the construction will be consistent enough that it will be convincing. So method number one for projecting points is using any known angles. Now, I could find any other known angles and see if they intersect with my curve, but there aren't any. This line right here is also a known angle. And we could use it to project the point, but no points are actually intersecting with it. So how do you mirror a point that doesn't actually intersect an already known angle? Well, we can actually define our own diagonals so long as we can make sure that that angle is consistent in between the two lines, okay? So instead of starting from a known diagonal that we already have, we could start by finding an actual point that we want to mirror. So in this case, for the sake of this example, I'm going to pick something along down here. Once you find the point that you want to mirror, what you can actually do is you could drop a diagonal that goes from the center of the mirror line through the point we want to mirror all the way to the other side of the rectangle. Now, having this in hand, I can apply the same technique of projecting over by drawing a line that's perpendicular to the mirror line, right? So it's going across the mirror line to find the opposite diagonal. And with the opposite diagonal defined, now I just have to project the point in the same way I did in the first example. And my line is dropping there a little bit. It's fine. I'm just gonna kind of visually estimate it. Know that it goes somewhere there. Now all you gotta do is connect the dots. Now this part of the process can sometimes reveal inconsistencies in your construction. Like maybe this point won't be exactly there, maybe it's shifted over a little bit, but the more points you have along the construction, the easier it is to estimate where the curve should go. So remember, in this kind of drawing, we're not looking for perfection, even though you could use this with like rulers and make this everything perfectly consistent, but it's about actually having a consistent construction that makes the whole thing convincing. Does that make sense? Now, if you understand this concept like this orthographically, it's fairly simple to translate it to something in perspective. So let me show you that next. So now let's say we're gonna actually try to draw a bridge, but instead of it being flat, it's actually receding into the distance. I have a little island out there and another one up front here. And now I'm going to try to draw a bridge that somehow distorts in a proper way, right? Well, the concept is exactly the same. You just have to keep one thing in mind, which is the vanishing points of the image. So I got my horizon line right down here. Here's two little posts so we could kind of see where the bridge is gonna go. And now instead of drawing my plane obviously as a perfect square, I have to actually make it recede into the distance. So it has to go down towards my vanishing point, which is gonna be somewhere out here. Yeah, something like that's pretty good. Now we start with what we already know, which is that in order to make a symmetrical shape, we need to first define a rectangle that we could divide in half so we could use it as a mirror plane. So now, in order to find the mirror line, we divide the square in half by dropping diagonals. And this allows us to see that the mirror axis is actually shifted over towards that vanishing point. Now with this in place, we just have to define the shape for the bridge and do the projection. Now you could already see here how this technique is useful because trying to figure out how it actually extends on this side is going to look different. It's going to be very distorted. So let's go ahead and start by using a known diagonal, an angle that we already know is consistent in a point that's already intersected. Now again, instead of going directly across perpendicular to the mirror axis, that's the mirror axis, well, it's kind of over here. Anyway, instead of going across, we have to actually go down to the vanishing point and through in order to make sure that this is all consistent with the perspective. Now again, my straight lines aren't perfect, but it's good enough. I could kind of see it's falling, so I'm going to correct it a little bit and find that my intersection point is somewhere along there. Now for my second diagonal, I don't have a nicely intersecting angle, so I'll make my own, just like we learned last time. And what's cool is I get to choose where down this curve I can actually place the point that will actually help me. So I'm thinking somewhere around there will be helpful. So now again, we draw through the point and all the way to the other side of the rectangle, and that's the point we're gonna use to project the entire diagonal. Now with the diagonal projected, all I have to do is move the point over and find where it intersects. Again, we always have to follow down through the vanishing point, and so long as you do that, the whole thing will work out. And now look at that, look at how far on the other side that point has to be for it to actually be distorting properly. Even though all my construction lines aren't exactly perfect, it's still extremely helpful because I could see just how far this point has to be in order to distort properly, and that's very useful to me. So now all we gotta do is finish the curve. And there you have it, an arc that is actually mirrored properly and that is convincingly placed in perspective. Isn't that amazing? I think it is. Now from here on out, I could finish out my drawing, I could add more details, put the other side of the curve in there, just have fun with the drawing itself. All right, friend, and that's it. I hope that was useful to you. Again, I'm making these videos because I feel that YouTube has a lot of really great tutorials for learning the basics. But if you want to learn any of the in-depth techniques, you kind of got to go looking through the books. I myself, I'm learning from Scott Robertson's How to Draw, and a couple other ones. And I just like sharing what I learned along the way. So mirroring things in perspective. Was that useful to you? Please let me know about it in the comments if you need clarifications. Was the video too short, too long? Do you think this is actually valuable content? Just let me know. And again, if you'd like more of these kinds of perspective tutorials, I'm currently working on a series. You can find the playlist here perhaps. And also please just subscribe to my channel. I don't just make tutorials. I love chronicling my adventures making art in general. And so I hope I'll keep seeing you in another video. All right, ciao.